We're in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, and I'm a Partnerships and Community Manager here at AllVoices, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. Today, I'm excited to welcome our next guest onto the show, Charlene Li. She is the founder of Altimeter, author, speaker, advisor, and board member. Charlene, thank you so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture. If you want to share a little bit more about yourself, including your pronouns for our audience, and also when you were younger, do you remember how you answered the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Charlene Li. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I am the founder of Altimeter Group, and I've been a longtime analyst and author, helping leaders thrive with disruption. As a child, I dreamed about becoming a doctor like my dad, like so many of my friends and family. And I wanted more than anything to be able to practice medicine, help people. I just saw what a great service that my father and other doctors were doing. I just thought, wow, that's so fulfilling. I want to do that. That didn't work out for me. Instead, I'm helping people deal with a different type of symptoms and issues in their lives and in their organizations, especially around all the changes that are happening around them. And I have been doing this for about 20 years and absolutely love what I do.
Yeah, I could tell that you have a passion for what you do, and you're also, that common thread of helping people still rings true. I definitely want to ask your why and how your personal journey really shaped you up until this point to found Altimeter.
Sure. When I came out of business school back in 1993, ages ago, the thing that was happening around the world was this new technology of online communities, AOL, CompuServe, Prodigy. The World Wide Web hadn't been invented yet. It was invented that spring when I graduated. And I just thought that this had huge potential for changing our world. And I've been active in it, playing with it, using it for the past 2-3 years. And I think I want to put my career in this area because I always believed that wherever change was happening, that's where opportunities were going to be created. So many of my friends coming out of Harvard Business School were going into investment banking or into consulting. And I come from the consulting world and I realized that could always be there, but I'm young. I have the opportunity to try something new. So I headed to newspapers, which is not the intuitive choice for you to be coming into a job in that industry, and went to the newspapers in San Jose, California, in the middle of Silicon Valley at the San Jose Mercury News. And I had a front row seat to the internet being born. And was helping our sales department and advertising department figure out what does it mean to sell advertising, to create a business on the internet, on the World Wide Web, and continue doing that. And then as I started a family, decided to back away from day-to-day operations, become an analyst. I thought I'd be an analyst for 2 years. I was raising my young kids, and I'm still with it now, 22 years later, and still growing strong.
I love that. I mean, you're right that with change comes huge opportunities. So much has changed over the past 18 months. And I'm sure since you've been in the industry as well, all of the kind of trends you're seeing and really leaders lean into innovation and creativity. What's the current problem you're trying to solve? What's taking up the most brain space right now?
My focus right now is how do leaders lead exponential change, transformative change, not just incremental change, but big, huge change that drives impact and growth. The reality is we're not prepared to do that. Nothing in our leadership background has prepared us, has trained us, given us the background and the tool sets and the mindsets and the skill sets to be able to do this. So how do we do this? How do we develop that and do it really quickly? What we saw 18 months ago is we were forced into this change and we were very ill prepared. We made it, we were able to make that shift, but it was not pretty. And all of our research says that people feel they went through huge amounts of change over the last 2 years, but they expect the next 2 years to be even more disruptive, to have even more change. So people don't see it slowing down. If anything, they see it speeding up.
Absolutely. And a lot of leaders as well are trying to implement exponential change their strategies, and also bring it down to company values and really create a company culture that is really intentional. I saw that kind of in one of your posts as well. You said that we need to change our approach to building employee relationships through, core tenets like integrity, agency, and openness, which makes sense in thought. But I want to know, in your perspective, can you give an example of what each value looks like in practice at the workplace?
Sure. Integrity, agency, and openness. Integrity is we have a relationship and it's built on a foundation of trust and honesty and fairness. And so if there's something that I need to tell you, but I'm holding it back, then that's not a relationship built on integrity. Integrity says, I'm going to show up and I'm going to be straightforward with you. I'm
Mhm.
going to respect the fact that you can take this, and I'm not going to hide things from you. So if I decided that it's going to be time for me to move on to another job because my growth opportunities here are no longer here for me, you're
Mhm.
going to respect that and thank me for being so straightforward about this and being in integrity versus sneaking around and going out for lunch, quote, with people and interviewing for a job. And if you take an integrity approach, then of course, I'm committed to your development, whether it's here or someplace else. I'm going to do my best as
Mhm.
your employer to help you find your next position. And in return, you're going to help me find your replacement and train that replacement. And maybe that person might even be better than you because you know what your shortcomings are. You can't fill this job. That's a totally different way of working
Mhm.
than most people have. So that's integrity. Agency says that every single person can act like an owner and that every person understands the strategy and can be responsible, take accountability for their actions. They don't have to ask for permission to do something. They already know they have the ability to do something. And they're going to make sure they're communicating with everybody so that they know what everyone is doing. And also be very open, which is the third thing, about when things are not going right.
Yeah.
We're perfectly fine telling everybody when things are going wrong, giving a thumbs up, but we tend to shy away from admitting that things aren't working out. And
Mhm.
yet that's what we need because things don't work out all the time. And your best way of figuring out how something is going to work is to let people know, I don't know how to do this. Come and help me. I need your help. There
Mhm.
is tremendous strength in admitting that vulnerability. And then builds a fantastic culture that says we're all here and together. There's no judgment. There's
Mhm.
no criticism about things not working out. Things just don't work out sometimes. It's not you, it's the project. So being
Exactly.
able to separate those two things is very, very key.
It sounds like what you're talking about too is this mutual foundation of trust, in that, the positive feedback and negative feedback is all given with great intent, and you have that relationship with someone or the company where you trust them to give that constructive feedback and lean into those vulnerable and hard conversations saying, I don't know, or this isn't working out, can you help me with this? You mentioned kind of the ideology that everybody is an owner, which I definitely agree with as well. And I want to ask specifically in regards to people managers and C-suite executives. How do we kind of hold accountable these formal leadership roles in terms of creating this culture of trust and psychological safety that is really intentional and doesn't just happen?
I think the most important thing to do is to do pulse surveys, not the annual survey of employee engagement. It's actually the other way around. Do you feel you have the resources? Do you feel like you are known by your manager? Do you trust your manager? And a really good way of testing that is their trust up and down throughout the ladder. Do you feel comfortable skip leveling? Can you skip a level and talk to your boss's boss? How comfortable are you doing that? How comfortable is your boss doing that? Because if things aren't working out for some reason, who else can you go to? If you feel like there are resources and available and that you're seen and known and that you always have these options, then that goes a long way to building that trust. We know that the number one determinant of somebody's experience is the relationship with their manager.
Mhm.
And so, but yet we hold our managers accountable for the strength of that relationship. These pulse feedbacks, the constant feedback are ways for us as managers to get better and better at the craft of leadership.
Yeah. I think that active listening, not being afraid of that feedback, really leaning into that is really crucial and important. Sometimes folks are a little afraid of that feedback because they know it's going to be constructive, or they know it's not working well, or they're afraid that if they get the feedback, they have to action on it. You have a responsibility to do something. And I want to ask your opinion in terms of what role do you see really employee feedback management and listening manifesting at thriving companies?
I think feedback is the most important tool that a company has. And I can always tell when a company is not doing well. I would ask, so what does your feedback process look like? What is your feedback culture? And they're like, should we have one? That's a dead giveaway. That is not working well. One of the things we did at Altimeter early on was to set up a process for feedback, giving both constructive feedback as well as positive feedback. You need both. And we saw it as a gift. The feedback of giving people that process is such a gift to people because you don't have to do it. It's not part of the job requirement. So it is literally something that you give of your own time, of your own volition. And when you have a process, and we used a simple one that was developed by the Center for Creative Leadership, SBI, Situation, Behavior, and Impact. Here's a situation that we saw. We were in a meeting. The behavior I'd noticed that you exhibited and the impact on me and other people is what I observed here. And that's all you have to do. Situation, behavior, impact. It's so simple.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, when you practice it consistently, you ask, can I give you a piece of feedback? And you don't know whether it's going to be positive or constructive, but you remain open to it and understand that it's coming from a really good place, that we are aligned in our mission together, that I want you to do the best. And I'm doing this from a point of a gift. Then that changes the whole dynamic of feedback to being this rare thing that you get to something you build into your everyday relationships and communications.
Yeah, it's all about the effective communication, having that common ground. I want you to do better. I want the company to do better. And you have a framework for giving and receiving feedback as well. We know that if you have, the most thriving company culture, you do have trust in it. People are still coming into the organization, bringing in their own experiences with them, maybe where they're fearing retaliation from their manager, or they gave feedback once and nothing was done about it. So everybody has those individual experiences. What is your advice for navigating these situations where power dynamics, if it's your manager or the CEO or a skip level, is present?
Again, when the power dynamics are not moving in the favor of building stronger relationships, that's when that scaffolding around the people, the process to be able to do this, ways to escalate things to say, hey, I'm not getting that support that I need and want. To be able to call in reinforcements of that scaffolding is absolutely key. I think about them as release valves that you have, but you can't just expect managers who have never done this to just go out there and instantaneously change. I worked with one organization that did this for a whole entire year because they realized if they wanted to be the most disruptive, innovative company that they wanted to be, they needed to fix this one thing that was dysfunctional.
Mm-hmm.
People just didn't feel comfortable giving each other real-time live feedback in meetings out of a value of respect. So they had morphed this value of respect into you'd never disagree with people. And so there was all this time and effort spent going around back doors, calling up individual meetings to give like feedback individually and like really tiptoeing around it. It just was not working. It was completely dysfunctional. So they called a timeout. They said, this format that we have, we need to rethink this value. And this is what it now means. And these are the behaviors associated with that. And this is how we're going to give feedback. And they trained every leader to not talk in the meetings and to go around and ask everybody else what they thought about this and to prepare the space for them to say, give me all the things that you think are going right and all the things that you're going wrong, the plus and deltas to everything, and creating that safe container then for everybody to speak up.
I think creating that space, that really intentional space, is important for folks, and really thinking about intentional and inclusive design to give and receive feedback. Some people will be comfortable doing it one-on-one, in poll surveys, in an anonymous feedback way, in a forum as well. And you want to make sure that everybody's voices are heard. And to your point too, in terms of like a nice company culture and respect and morphing that value, some folks are really conflict avoidant. And again, that modeling kind of relationship is seen out in actions through your leader, whether it's your people manager or CEO? Are there ways that you could intentionally foster a less conflict avoidant team, even though we know that it's natural, but healthy discourse is a good thing, especially for innovation, which is what you just talked about as well?
Right. Again, it's if people are having a really hard time having regular conflict or just avoidance of this, and this is about how you figure out how to disagree,
Mhm.
in that your relationship is not dependent on whether you agree or disagree. I go back to the Supreme Court, where Justice Scalia and Justice Ruth Ginsburg, Bader Ginsburg, had a fantastic relationship. I
Mhm.
mean, they were incredibly close friends, and they were on opposite ends of the political spectrum, but they were incredibly close friends, and they were not going to let a Supreme Court ruling get in the way of their friendship. So if they could do it, right, in the midst of so much political turmoil and differences, these little differences that we have in our workplace, where we disagree about how something can work, should not be impacting our relationship. So it's so important to walk into these meetings to say, we're good. Are we good? And to have clearing. Because if there's anything that's standing in the way of integrity in that relationship, then it has to be said. The way we describe integrity is having the ability to have these tough conversations so that we can make sure that our relationships are strong.
Mhm.
No relationships are strong just by accident. You have to intentionally work on them. And that means clearing anything that may be standing in the way. It could be, when you were in that meeting and you cut me off, that made me feel really bad. I
Mhm.
felt like you didn't trust me to finish that. And I would appreciate, do you remember that? And they go, yeah, I remember that. I would appreciate it if you could just let me finish and then you can chime in. But please don't talk over me. Don't interrupt me. So little pieces of feedback like that really help. It was not intentional of that person to talk over, pretty inadvertent. They would never do that, but they realized now that the behavior was really hurting the relationship. So they're going to change in the future because that relationship is important.
Absolutely. It comes down to your relationship and building that trust. I think about when you're speaking as well, the intent versus the impact of what's actually happening, and you sharing in real time kind of how you're feeling as well. We're talking about a lot of kind of qualitative ways in terms of company culture to create an environment where feedback is welcome. Oftentimes in our interview series, people want to know the ROI, measuring success. So I want to ask, what are some quantitative and qualitative ways you can measure, having that company culture? And also, is it kind of possible to over rely on these metrics to tell you a story?
Yes, I do believe that metrics are fantastic. I love measuring things.
Mhm.
The detailed metrics, though, around all these different dashboards, I think it gets way too complicated because you can only measure and manage, in particular, manage only so many metrics. And just because you can measure it doesn't mean you should actually manage it. Those are
Okay.
two very different things. So there are two things you manage and you measure: beliefs and the behaviors. Does an employee believe that they are heard? Do they believe that they can take action? Do they believe they have agency and ownership? Do they believe that there is trust? Do they have trust? So you can test for all these beliefs. This is on a simple scale, and that is completely measurable. Again, from a very important point of view, your employee's point of view, same as the executives and the managers. And then you look at the behaviors. How
Mhm.
often are people volunteering ideas? How often are they actually proactively working across departments? Are innovation ideas coming up and from many different areas? Or are they just coming from a small few inner circle number of people? What do you want those metrics and behaviors to look like? And then you can put those in place. And you should see some correlation with beliefs going up and the desired behaviors going up too. If they're not going up and they're kind of wacky, then you can go and diagnose what's happening here. The belief's not moving or the behavior is not translating over here. And then you can diagnose and decide what other actions you have to take.
I think that definitely makes sense in terms of asking yourself. I think of kind of the talk time if you as a leader are leading a meeting and who's participating, who feels comfortable asking, questions in meetings, where ideas are coming from. I think that's a great kind of point to highlight there as well. We know that with so many changes, people are changing the way they're giving and receiving feedback in a digital way. What are some common mistakes you've seen, folks make when they're trying to be a disruptor in the space and really trying to kind of be different?
The biggest mistake is they think their job is to break things. They think that their job is to go and disrupt something, go and blow up a preconceived conception. And that's fantastic, but they also need to be able to put it back together again, to be able to say, okay, we're going to blow it up, and this is what we're going to build now in the future. This is what the future is going to look like, and this is the first step we're going to take, the second step, and the third step, and the fourth step. You don't get to just blow things up and not build things. And I think this is the hardest thing. You've got to be two types of people at the same time. Disruptors, really good disruptors, are able to pull people in. They create a movement for change. They can set up a vision for what the future is going to look like, and then put the resources and the people together to be able to do that. Otherwise, you're just basically waving your hands and being a prognosticator. You're being a provocateur, but you're not necessarily creating change and growth and impact.
Yeah, breaking things does not, it's not a sustainable strategy for the future. You need to be able to rebuild and structure things and have that kind of foresight as well. So I do like that, especially with so many technology companies and companies in general saying, our goal is to break things. And you don't really hear about the rebuilding part, which is an important piece to the story. You have to rebuild something. How would you finish the sentence? In order for companies to be successful in the future, they must have blank.
They must have great relationships. They must focus on relationships. And this is something so basic. And I say this as a technologist, as somebody who loves the technology, sees a huge potential for them. If you do not put relationships first and understand how technologies can support those relationships, then you will not be able to win. Because the reason why disruption is so hard, the reason why we feel disrupted, is that our relationships, the way we see things working internally and externally, they're being pulled apart. And until we are able to put those relationships back together again, to know how we stand with each other, we're going to continue to feel disrupted. So disruptive organizations are able to create a container where those relationships are preserved. They're moving fast, they're breaking things, but they're not breaking the relationship. This is the most fascinating thing. They are incredibly well run, lots of structure and governance, all in service of supporting those relationships. Everything else is changing around them, but those relationships are solid. They are built on a firm foundation. So that's the biggest mistake. And the most important thing that companies have to focus on is the relationships they have with each other internally, across departments, into customers, and across the ecosystem.
I like the phrase that you used in terms of framing it around relationships and in service of relationships. Is your strategy serving the relationships of your employees, of your company? Are you the tools, resources, and frameworks for giving feedback? Are they in service of supporting these relationships? I think people are one of the most valuable resources at a company. So it is really important to really invest the time, money, and resources into that. Charlene, is there anything I didn't ask you that you want to share with our audience today, or maybe 1 to 2 key insights you hope they bring with them as they listen to the end of our conversation?
I think the biggest one, and this is what you're all about, is how do you think about culture in a more strategic way? Because we don't always have the culture we want. We have the culture that we have. But if you can paint a picture of what you want, what the future could look like, if you were to put out, make little vignettes of movies of what the future could look like, and then you think about what you have to do today to make that possible, you can intentionally and strategically, systematically change your culture. Never think that you can't, that it's a static thing. You are changing your culture every single day, just simply by not intentionally changing it. So just basically letting all these new people or new circumstances create it. And then you have to say, do we want these new features to be part of our culture? What parts of our culture no longer serve us and we need to jettison them? And how do they need to be replaced by new behaviors and beliefs? So systematically, consistently, constantly, strategically thinking about your culture is the most important thing to do. It is really hard stuff. It is not soft and easy. It is really hard. And because it's hard, most companies don't spend enough time thinking about it.
It is really hard. It's systemic. And I like the word you used in terms of features of your company culture, because that's similar to a product. You have different editions of a product, you have new product releases, and it's important to really proactively and intentionally think about the culture and the workplace that you want to create for your current employees, future employees, and yourself as an individual as well.
Exactly.
Charlene, thank you so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture. I enjoyed our conversation today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, and as a reminder for folks who are listening, at AllVoices, we believe in employee feedback management, and we know that hearing all voices is a requirement for the company to succeed. Have a good rest of your afternoon, everyone.